We are going to get started. My name is Kate. I'm with Environment Maryland. We are so glad that you've joined us tonight for Conservation Conversations. For someone or anyone who is just joining us for the first time, a little bit about this series. It was born out of sort of understanding that we are both in a time of distancing from people, but also having this unique opportunity to turn our attention and shift our perspective around some of these topics that maybe we've never been able to spend time on before. So Bridget and I started this series to allow people a space to connect and to learn things and to ask questions and to sort of be in community, but also to allow us to sort of have a new sense of reverence for these different pieces of nature and natural systems that maybe we haven't had time to really learn about before. A quick update. I know we had scheduled tonight Representative Sharice Davids. That was postponed because she has to be in Congress in the morning to vote. So I guess that's a pretty good reason. We are rescheduling that currently. We will have that official date announced in the next couple days. We're just waiting to hear what's going to happen for her schedule, which, as we know, is really up in the air for so many people, but that will be rescheduled. However, we are so excited to have an incredible guest who is going to be teaching us so much. So I'm going to turn it over to Bridget to do the introduction of our guest. And again, thank you all for joining. Please, if you have questions throughout, put them in the Q&A or in the chat on Facebook, and we will save time at the end.
Thank you, Kate. So like Kate said, I am Bridget Sanderson. I'm the director with Environment Missouri, based out of Kansas City. We're here to protect our clean air, clean water, and our public spaces. Just remember to leave any comments in the Facebook live stream, as well as the chat section of the webinar, depending on which platform you're on. And we will ask those at the end. There will be 10 minutes worth of questions at the end. So I am incredibly excited to introduce our guest tonight. She's a very close friend of mine and what we're now dubbing friend of the conversation, because she is a repeat guest now, but it's Kristen Bontrager. So a little bit about her. After graduating from Washburn University in 2016 with a degree in biology, Kristen has focused her career and advocacy on ecology and botany. While at Washburn, her research focused on the species of plants that colonize the understory of invasive bush honeysuckle. She also spent time in the forests of Costa Rica studying biodiversity of arthropods. In Kansas City, after graduating college, Kristen worked for Heartland Conservation Alliance under their 2016 National Fish and Wildlife: A Monarch's View of the City project. From there, she worked as a maintenance manager and landscape ecologist for a local native plant landscaping company, Down to Earth Services. Kristen volunteers for many organizations, including Heartland Conservation Alliance's Policy Work Group and Partnership Work Group. Kristen has assisted in teaching the Green Guard Stewards program for the past 4 years, and she is passionate about conservation for both environmental preservation and protecting the communities around Kansas City that she loves. While not listing off the correct scientific names of plants to anyone who will listen, Kristen enjoys reading books with her 2 cats, Grub and Dwight. So, Kristen, thank you so much for coming on, and take it away.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Just a quick little, it looks like I'm fading into a prairie, and I wish I were. This is one of the most beautiful places I've seen. It is a gorgeous prairie that was, I did some natural resource management on. All of these are beautiful native plants behind me. In particular, this is a weird mirror over here. This purple flower, it's called bergamot. So just a little quick ID. So anyway, I am here to talk to everybody about essentially invasive species, but how do we garden during a global pandemic? How do we get ourselves ready? And here in the Midwest, we have a lot of native plant sales, and our vendors are extremely responsible in following all of the CDC guidelines. So some of us have not been able to, I personally like to get my plants in like March, April. I get them in the ground. So the purpose of telling everybody about invasive species is because they always end up in our garden beds. And one thing that we can all do while we can't plant plants, or if we don't feel comfortable going to, any store that sells plants is prepare our beds. And for me, that means removing all of our little invasive species, all our little trees, because my trees happen to send in tiny little seedlings all over the place. And so just a quick little background. I do apologize, I keep disappearing into the prairie, but I hope I just can disappear into the prairie. So a little background about invasive species versus native species is that invasive species were introduced to their area. They did not co-evolve with beneficial or predatory critters. So beneficial would be, you know, some, for us, we have purple coneflower, and once it's done flowering, it deadheads and it's got the seeds on the top, and that actually is a food source for a little finch, and that's very exciting. And our native plants don't have that evolution, coevolution with other species. So that means that they are just producing these fruits and berries that other birds and wildlife are not used to. And they also don't have anything to keep their growth in check. Like a lot of our plants here have natural competitors, including other plants and critters. So there's no natural competition, and this gives our invasive species, our introduced species, our non-native species, a competitive advantage. So they are able to grow much quicker and with less competition than our native plants are. And again, that's because they don't have anything keeping them in check. A great example is, so Bridget talked about that my undergrad research involving invasive honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle. And so this is actually something in all over, and specifically in the Midwest and Kansas City, Missouri, is that we see in our woodlands that everything greens up first in March. Well, that everything is bush honeysuckle. And so that gets the chance to take in more nutrients and take in more sunlight and grow and cover the forest floor. This gives it a competitive advantage, as nothing else is green yet when this stuff greens up. And another thing about it is that it will stay green up until November when everything's gone. So it's just growing and growing and growing while nothing else can grow and thrive. And so that's kind of that's the huge issue with native plants, is that it will eventually take over everything because it's able to. And so the difference in the, you know, introduced invasive plants and native plants are that native plants have been with us pre-colonialization time. They do have competition. They have natural competition. And just a great example in behind me is this gorgeous prairie. You can see that it's not one species, it's several species. So these are all growing together and working together and competing to keep each other at bay, which is beneficial because it allows more species to come in, giving a greater biodiversity. And we want biodiversity. And back to my honeysuckle example, in March, when it comes out and it covers the understory, that also means that it doesn't allow baby trees to come in or other types of plants because there's no sunlight for it. And if you think about it that way, say, you know, there's a tree global pandemic and all the old trees die. Well, then what you have left is honeysuckle, and you have no ability for these new little baby trees to grow and to mature. And so that's a huge issue. And that's why we want to promote biodiversity, is because it's, you know, if something attacks these little purple flowers, well, then we have all these other plants around us, and it doesn't just leave us with a barren wasteland. And so that's what the importance is of biodiversity, and why native plants are so great for that, is they just keep each other in check, you know, they work together. And native plants also have evolved with critters, all types of critters. And they're used to our, in the Midwest here in Kansas and Missouri, we have very, very brutal winters. I hate them. We also have, sometimes our summers can be very like drought-like conditions, but then we can also get massive amounts of rain. And so our native plants have evolved and acclimated and adapted to these situations, which means that they can take in that massive amount of water. And a lot of times I use that knowledge for landscaping, and I will put a rain garden around someone's home and help them prevent flooding and water issues into their home. And native plants can also do that because their root system is exceptionally deep. So it can grab up all that water. And not all, but a lot of our invasive species cannot do that, especially turfgrass, which is not invasive. So all of these factors makes our native plants absolutely perfect for where we're at, because this is where they are from. They have evolved here. They live well with each other. They can handle our changing environment. It's perfect. They create biodiversity. And so having this info in mind, I wanted us to tackle, our garden issues. And like I said before, with invasive species, that's going to be my main topic, is garden issues, while also just covering a little bit of large landscape issues with invasive species. So there are a lot of finch encroachers, is what I call them. And those are my biggest issue at my house right now, because they climb over my neighbor's fence and they climb up my trees, and they also climb into my garden, which is a big pain because vines are very difficult to remove. As well as fence encroachers, I'm also going to talk about bush honeysuckle. And so the reason that these are so vital to know about is because they spread very easily. And bush honeysuckle has that other competitive advantage where the birds will eat its berries and go and poop them elsewhere and grow new plants. They also emit poisonous compounds out of their roots to kill other plants and prevent other plants from growing there. So bush honeysuckle is like our really, really bully, we hate him invasive plant. And I'm just going to share with you a couple pictures so that everyone has the ability to see what it looks like and potentially ID them themselves. And as I talk about these other fence encroachers, I will have photos as well. So quickly, I'm going to okay, so this is the dreaded, my hated, my nemesis, bush honeysuckle. And this just kind of shows you a general picture of it. And so this is a great way to be able to identify bush honeysuckle. And this is an interesting way to do it because, so bush honeysuckle has the opposite leaves here. I'm pointing to my screen as if you can see it, versus alternate. So for me, the opposite is on the right side. And you can just take note of how these leaves are in relation to each other on the branch. And as you can see, they are the same way in this photo, as are their berries. And so the best way to identify invasive bush honeysuckle, if the berries are not there and their flowers are not there, because often when I'm going out to remove it, I don't have the luxury of having these berries and these flowers that make it very easy to see. So as I showed you on the previous picture, leaf arrangement opposite, as you can see, they grow opposite of each other rather than alternate as our alternate choice here. So there's our bush honeysuckle, and their flowers, they are a white and yellowish. You'll see them right now driving down the highway in the Midwest. They're everywhere. They're in all of our woodlands, and their berry clusters are over another way to identify them if you're lucky enough to, well, lucky enough. And they also do stay green, like I said earlier, into November. Okay, our first fence encroacher. So this is winter creeper. This is a huge, huge issue for me, not only in landscaping, but also in doing large landscapes. And as you can see, it's growing up this tree, which actually ends up kind of harming the tree. The vines can get big enough and they can choke trees out eventually. Here is a really, really sad example of my backyard. And so the winter creeper came from the other side of the fence, the side that doesn't have those 3 slats, and then it crawled over, and it crawled over so intensely that it also made its home in trying to make a lawn in my yard of winter creeper. And there's another vine, a fence encroacher. I didn't have a good enough picture of it, and this is Japanese honeysuckle. So it is different from the most recent honeysuckle I showed you, the bush honeysuckle. This stuff is a vine. It'll grow on all your fences. If you don't know the difference between mini vines, it's going to look like all your other vines. It's going to look like the invasive clematis that we have here. Believe it or not, we do have invasive ones of those. And so this is just a great picture of that. I've seen it growing, covering an entire woodland area, and it's very heartbreaking. However, you can remove it. Another common fence encroacher or tree climber is this bad boy. This is English ivy. And it was planted for ornamental value. However, it is invasive and it does take over our native habitat. This picture here is especially sad, seeing that it is growing up an invasive tree right now. That's here nor there. And this stuff will grow all over in the shade, and it covers everything. And it does the same thing that winter creeper does. And these things have a great competitive advantage because vines spend much less of their energy to grow. It's easier for them. They don't have to support an entire system, such as our plants and grasses and trees have to. And this picture, which is absolutely gorgeous, but drives me insane how beautiful this picture is, because this is garlic mustard. This is actually a huge issue here in the Midwest. It grows all over the garden beds, and these little pods that you can see in the picture on the left, the very bright picture where the white flowers are the center, those pods are all seeds, and those seeds are going to spread everywhere. The other thing about garlic mustard is that when you pull it, you actually have to physically remove it from the site where you've pulled it, because it will reroot. So often you have to put it in some type of disposal. Like, you can put it in a trash can, that's fine. It is edible, so you could turn it into a pesto as long as you remove it from the site, as it will reroot. And again, so what I say when I talk about this is that it has high fecundity, which means it has great ability to reproduce and spread, and it will. And this, a lot of these pictures came from my mother's yard, which I spent so long pulling this stuff out. So now we're going to get on the very controversial topic of herbicide. And this picture, I have a reason for it. Herbicide, ideally you wouldn't use it. If you have all of the time in the world and you're going to be out there every single day, sure, hand pull all of your vines. I do that at my house because, you know, I choose to. But there are certain situations.
Kristen, I'm
Yes.
so sorry to interrupt you, but it looks like your slides are acting a little interesting right now. Would you mind like maybe reloading? Oh. Yeah, now click on. It looks fine right now from a distance.
Okay.
Having maybe some internet issues. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so just with large landscapes, unfortunately, it is almost impossible to not use any type of herbicide. And so in this example I have, if you have to use it in your beds or large landscapes, the picture that is on the left, the one without the paper bag, is a picture of invasive bush honeysuckle. And it also has our native flames leaf coreopsis next to it. So, you know, you can pull it, but this is a photo from a large landscape. It's on a prairie, and I was doing management practices out there. And so instead of, you know, killing both the plants, what I did is I put a paper sack in between both plants. And as you can see on the right, you can see where the spray is, the overspray, and it's all collected by the bag. I leave it there for a few seconds, let it dry, and it will not harm the other plants. So this is one very safe way that if you have to use a foliar spray and it's near other things, that you can do it and it'll only hit the plant. There are other ways to remove invasive species, and this is my favorite way. This is the least environmentally detrimental. So this is called stump treating. So in the picture on the left, I am cutting down the honeysuckle and I'm using shears. And then after it is cut, immediately after is when you do the stump treatment. You have to do it immediately after or it will not work. And this gets down into the roots, and it allows you to treat the plants without having to do a foliar spray, which is the foliar spray is very effective for certain things, specifically vines. But a stump treatment will work. You can do tiny stump treatments. You're just gonna, you know, be dabbing it on a lot. People have asked me about foliar spray, and you can paint it on each individual leaf. If we're doing it in a small garden, why not? You know, if you can't pull it and you can't be out there every day and you want to eradicate the invasive species, then paint it on, you know, take your time. The thing about applying these herbicides is that, as we know, they are dangerous. They are a last resort, or they're a last resort. And so with that in mind, you know, we need to do safety. Safety is number one. We have to be protected. As you can see in here, I'm being safe with my hands. However, you should be wearing long sleeves and long pants, closed-toed shoes, gloves, and eyewear. Some other issues are that you never spray above your head, and don't ever spray in the wind, and don't spray in the heat. And these are also things to consider about herbicides, is that they can be so dangerous that if you spray it in the heat, then it can actually drift, and that's, you know, drift from one plant to another, and it'll kill the plants that you don't want killed. So just try and stay away from herbicides as best as possible. again, sometimes it is unavoidable. But in those circumstances, in large landscapes, it's usually done by professionals. And I do have a couple links for homeowners to look at, and if there's a way to link that onto this, I will provide those. And I just, invasive species control can be very doom and gloom, and it can be disheartening because you don't think that you see any progress, and it's just, you're just always out there doing it. But I assure you, it is absolutely worth it. These photos were taken at a beautiful nature reserve, and the photo that's the most left with the moss, those are called fragile ferns.
Hey, Kristen.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. It's happening again. Will you?
Okay, I will just disconnect from that.
Sorry about that. There we go.
All right. So, even in this prairie, it's so, this prairie that I'm in, it's so worth it to me because in the end, you get to go out and there is progress. Sometimes it's not immediate, but you allow these beautiful special plants. And that slide that I showed you, if you could see it, those are just amazing spring ephemerals. They come out and they're a sign of a really quality woodland. It's a happy, healthy woodland. It's got diversity. And yes, there was honeysuckle in it, but we did honeysuckle removal. We removed these winter creeper vines, and it just allows these native plants to flourish and show their beauty and share their beauty with everybody. And there's always hope. There's light at the end of your tunnel. And even if it's just pulling weeds from your garden bed and you feel overwhelmed, just do a little bit at a time. Set baby goals for yourself. And just remember that you're doing it for the greater good, or you're doing it to be selfish and enjoy it for yourself. And either way, that's amazing. You should be able to do that. So go out and find all of the plants that aren't supposed to be there and get rid of them, because we're doing it not just for ourselves, but we're doing it for our future. And we are the future, but so are the kids.
That was great, Kristen. I loved that. I, have worked alongside you before trying to do invasive bush honeysuckle removal as well, and it is quite the tiring job. You're a lot better at it than I am, obviously. So we're going to take a little bit and do some questions and answers. We've got some questions from Facebook, and we've got, it looks like a question in the chat box on the webinar. Again, if you want to put all of your questions, just comment your questions out. We will read them to Kristen. And also, sorry everybody about that technical difficulty. I think that there's an internet issue in my house. So Michael Floyd on Facebook, he, has a few comments. He looks like he's super educated in invasive plants, but he did want to talk about Hedera helix. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, is a horrible invasive species here. Do you know anything about that plant?
Is it P-A-D, Hedera?
H-E-D-E-R-A.
Oh, I see it. Yes. Let's see, because I might. Oh, yeah. It's the same. You're going to want to kill it. And you can go out there and you can pull it and pull it and pull it. It's the same. It's the same. English ivy is its common name. That one's a little more difficult to pull, as it's a vine and they have runners underground that'll create new plants everywhere. But if you can't avoid herbicide, I would recommend that. But otherwise, just go pull it as often as you can.
Great. We have a question in the chat. And then I also have a couple of questions personally. The question in the chat is, how do you feel about turf grass?
If I never saw turf grass again, I'd be thrilled. It has very, very shallow roots. It does not absorb almost any water. It also is a monoculture, so you have zero biodiversity there. There are a lot of other options for using plants that will actually absorb water. And I'm just going to suggest to anyone that wants to remove their grass and do native plants in their yard, do a little bit of research about the short ones and always have borders. Borders are vital if you're going to remove turf grass.
Okay, I've got some questions myself too. I think that you kind of touched on this a little bit, but you called honeysuckle the bully plant, basically. I'm just curious, what is the most pervasive invasive plant across the United States?
I've seen honeysuckle everywhere, and I've also seen another evil, Lespedeza cuneata, also known as Sericea lespedeza. It is aggressively, it's got a massive seed bank. So everywhere that you see its little leaves, it has a bunch of seeds and it spreads everywhere. And then the seeds live in the ground. They have a seed bank for up to 3 years. So great job. We went out and we killed all of the stuff in our pasture and our prairies and our ags this year. It's great. Guess what? Next year, you're gonna have it all again until you eradicate that seed bank. And that also means getting rid of it. So Sericea lespedeza, bush honeysuckle. We also deal with tree of heaven a lot, which is a invasive tree, an invasive sumac, and it smells like rotten peanut butter. It's terrible. I hate everything about it.
All right, we have another question that was just sent to me from a beekeeper who is struggling with Multiflora rose and is wondering what is sort of the control while also being careful of her bees, and does she just have to rip it up, burn it? She's had a lot of different suggestions and is wondering what your input is.
I have seen Multiflora rose essentially melt with fire. However, don't ever spray when it's flowering. If you're a beekeeper, if your plant has not flowered yet, would be safe to spray it. I like to kill invasives. Like I'm not there for them to grow back. So personally, what I would do is I would do a foliar spray as gently and light as possible. Let that sit for 24 hours, and then I will cut it down and I will stump treat it. Now, I know that is not possible for everyone, and I also did do natural resource management in prairies, so I was trying to get it out of there. But the best advice I can give you is they have these weird giant saw attachments for weed eater type machines, and if you go in there and just whack those babies down and stump treat them, you'll have a lot less to deal with. You can pull them out. It takes a long time because, as you know, they're really viney, so you kind of have to like follow them down there and cut them as you go. But if you're a beekeeper, I would avoid foliar spray. It's pretty detrimental to the bees. So if you have to, do it when the plant's not flowering. Otherwise, stump treatment. Otherwise, pull it out, and best wishes to you.
Okay, I'm going to ask another question. So I'm curious, we have done an entire conservation conversations on, toxics and how detrimental they can be, and you kind of just touched on it a little bit for beekeepers. I'm just curious, why do you personally choose to use herbicides, for your work?
That is actually an excellent question, and I am glad you asked that. It is a very, very controversial topic, and I, being an ecologist and just loving what I can do for the environment, it was very difficult for me at first. The fact of the matter is, if we do not do something to control and eradicate invasive species, they will take over. We will have nothing left. We will have shallow root systems. We will have monocultures all over the place. So when you're dealing with a large landscape such as behind me, and you've got invasive species sneaking in there, you have to get them out. And you can't go out there and pull the invasive species in 115 acres every week. You have to go out there and be able to treat them and know that, okay, I can leave these for 2 weeks and I can come back. But so like just time, cost, but most importantly is that they are such aggressive spreaders, and they have such a competitive advantage over all of our native plants that eventually they will take over the entire and everything, and it'll just be a monoculture that can't support wildlife. Like honeysuckle berries can't support birds. It actually gives them cardiac disease because those berries are higher in sugar. They are meant for Southeast Asian birds, which have a different type of metabolism than our birds do. And that's just a small example, not even to mention what it does to our soils. And so if, use it as responsibly and as minimally as possible. I have provided information so that people can find the most responsible way to use herbicide. And I know that it is very controversial. And if we were in a perfect world, we would never have another invasive species and everything could just coexist together. However, we do have to kill all the invasive species.
Yes. So I have a related question to that question. It sounds like, you know, for the bulk of us who have a tiny backyard, maybe I'm just speaking about myself, but for the, you know, a lot of us who aren't dealing with full prairies, what are some of the techniques that we can use, you know, so that you're using it in these situations where there's no other option, but, you know, to reduce the overall kind of load of toxics that we're using? How can individuals like me who aren't dealing with a full prairie, what are some of the techniques that we can use and the steps we can go to first, saving that for a very last resort?
That also is a great question. I would say dedicate 30 minutes a week. Go outside and pull everything that you see. When it's baby, pull it. Don't get overwhelmed. Create small goals for yourself. Like I said, find the spot, do the 6-inch edge all the way around, and, you know, spend more time outside. Go outside, make yourself go outside 5 minutes a day and look at it. If you just look at it, that's a really good start, because and then when you see those little tiny chunks that are cleared, you're going to like the way that looks. You're going to want the rest of your area to be that way. And so, you know, I did a really good, I'd say 10 by 20 area. And granted, yes, I have done this for about a decade, but it took me less than an hour to get all of the weeds out. And they weren't just weeds, they were invasive species. Vinca is what I was dealing with, and winter creeper. And I just went at it and pulled them out, and then I went out again the next day and pulled all the baby ones out. And you're always gonna find some that you miss, but if you spend that time weekly, it's gonna be much less of a project than it is if you wait. And don't wait until June and July and call your landscape company and ask them to come do a quick little maintenance job for you, because it will be very expensive.
That's fair. I was just texted a question. This person would like to know, how does she feel about bamboo?
Well, we do have one native bamboo, and that one is okay. However, bamboo has been introduced to the United States, to North America, and it does not belong here. The non-native does not belong here. It aggressively takes over, and I know that people use it in agriculture and to do like production of paper products. Fine, just keep it controlled, but it is next to impossible to get rid of, and it will outcompete a lot of other native plants as well. I've seen it planted as a border, but there are so many other native plants and trees that will give you that same effect. So I like the native one, the native species, but I don't like the non-native ones.
I also have a question here. She's asking, when you say stump treatment, you kind of touched on it earlier, but can you give some more specifics of how someone would do stump treatment?
Of course, I can't even believe I glossed over that. So first you're gonna cut the actual, so here's the plant, my hand, this is the honeysuckle, and you're gonna cut it straight across. And then once you remove that part, you're left with just the little cut down part right there. So then you take I put mine in a small squirt bottle. A lot of them come in these big things. And I put mine in a small bottle, and then you go around the outer edge, so like the perimeter, and then you're done. Just make sure you treat it almost immediately. If you don't have a little squirt bottle and you don't want to buy one, you can use a paintbrush. You can apply it any way you want. It really is for me, it's my favorite way. It's the easiest way. You just cut it and then put a circle around it and forget about it.
Okay, so I have a double question that kind of goes hand in hand. So when you remove these invasive species, what is the best thing that you usually use to replace it? And also, how long does it usually take for an area of land to like kind of bounce back from, you know, being choked out by invasive species?
I'm going to answer the second question first, because it does not take that long at all. it's incredible how many native plants actually have their seeds that live in the ground and will just pop right up. It's very encouraging. And that's kind of what that last slide, if you guys couldn't see it, those are things that come in almost immediately after. You know, you're finally giving growth to these plants that are like, this is my home, this is where I live, this is what I'm used to growing in. I'm not used to being choked out. And so they come in pretty quickly and just they reestablish within, I would say, the first year or 2 years. And that's just natural. That's succession right there. That's not planting anything. That's just a woodland area. And so if you're removing, my suggestion would be the two most healthily aggressive native plants that I could think of in a sunny area. I would say probably lanceleaf coreopsis. Its scientific name is Coreopsis lanceolata, and it spreads really quickly. It's also a beautiful yellow flower. I personally like the leaf shape of it. And you can actually transplant it a lot and give it to your friends and be really cute and make all your neighbors have the same plants, and it's pretty. Not all the same, but you know, everyone can get excited about it. And if you're in a shadier area, one that I have successfully done myself is, I think it's called golden ground soul, but its name is Pacra obovata. And it's a shady one. It's so cute. It's got cute little tiny dark green leaves and a beautiful little yellow puffy flower, and it spreads by seed. I put seed down and had flowers, and it was spreading within the first year. And it was really great because it took the place of that vinca that I had removed. And now it's just, and it's been flowering for about a month now. It's just a beautiful little reminder when I come outside my front door and I just see this Pacra staring at me, and it's magical.
I am on mute. Okay. I have a question here in the chat. Oh, where did it go? There it is. I apologize. How many, oh, that's an interesting question. How many of our native species are now typically considered weeds?
A lot of them. Weeds are essentially just any plant that's growing where you don't want it to grow. So if you plant this gorgeous prairie right behind me in someone's front yard, well, most HOAs are not going to be okay with these really tall plants, so they're going to consider them weeds, when in reality they're actually very beneficial, high conservation value native plants that are creating this gorgeous ecosystem. So it really is just all on your aesthetic choices, and if you have an HOA, what they allow you to have.
Okay, so you kind of touched on this. I can't remember the plant, but I'm curious how a lot of invasives have gotten here. And I know that you had touched on one which was mostly planted as ornamental. I'm just curious if that's is ornamental plants basically the way that a lot of these invasive plants get here?
Most of them. And I do still see nurseries that sell honeysuckle and invasive clematis. Not all clematis is invasive. There are some. And most of it is ornamental value because, like I said, they grow unchecked. They have those, honeysuckle has those beautiful berries. And I am surprised at how much I'm learning that people don't necessarily know about plants and about what plants are what, which I also find is an opportunity because then I can help all my friends know what they're looking at. But ornamental value is essentially how most of them got here. I did recently, last year, read this really fascinating article about plant pollen and random and other seeds being on shipping containers through the ocean, specifically there's a bunch of travel throughout our southern states, and those can tend to, and as we know, the zebra mussel has definitely been on those, but I recently read that plants can go on that too. So I think it's just, mass transportation, lots of moving, irresponsible, a lot of times for agriculture. When I was in Costa Rica, I had to come back, I had to wash my shoes, I had to put them each in their own individual plastic bag, and I had to be checked at customs about it because I was on a farm. And if I were to step on some sort of invasive seed, I would have brought it back with me and could potentially start, it only takes one seed to start an issue.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Your intelligence on this issue and plants is just mind-blowing to me. And thank you so much, Kristen, for coming on, teaching us about invasive plants. If anybody else has any more questions, definitely send them to Kate or myself, and we can get them along to Kristen and, you know, get an answer back for you. Thank you so much for coming to Conservation Conversations again. You know, again, if you would like to, you know, support the work that we do, definitely donate to Environment Missouri and Environment Maryland. Kate, do you have anything else to close out with?
I actually would love to have everyone leave with maybe one piece of advice from you, Kristen. What is something that, you know, I'm so inspired hearing what you're saying, and have had a big journey from don't hurt any plants to being like, honeysuckle's gotta go. So what is a piece of advice for all of us who are on here that we can go out into the world, maybe not out, but go forth in our lives and advocate for our native species? What's one thing that we can all do in our lives to help stand up for our native plants?
That's an amazing question. I would say do the tiniest bit of research. Look into your local native plant vendors, because believe it or not, everybody has them. And kind of just look around and see, you know, Google is an amazing resource. And personally, I have recommended to my own mother, you know, like, Mom, why don't you just Google native plants, Kansas City, Missouri, short. So do the tiniest bit of research, and just know that, you know, even if you're new to it, there's always someone who wants to help you, and maybe that person is just me. So just find joy in finding native plants. That's what I do every single spring. I'm a native plant hunter. I look at them. So do the tiniest bit of research. Know that there is always bright and joy at the end of your invasive plant removal, and enjoy yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And like Bridget said, thank you all for coming. We will see you next week. And Bridget, anything else?
Nope. Thanks, Kristen. You guys have a good night.
Bye.